Mascot horror is a subgenre of horror that usually involves children's media being twisted into something horrifying. It's a subgenre that has remained pretty consistently popular online for a while now, whether it be for standout games that shine for their horror and creativity, to bottom-of-the-barrel slop that makes you question what even defines horror anymore. It's a subgenre with high highs and low lows, and I'm an absolutely massive fan of it. I've been a Mascot horror fan since around 2016, and I've loved the genre with my whole heart ever since. Because I love this genre so much, I think it's only fitting that I make 2 videos breaking down a total of 35 different Mascot horror games on this Iceberg, which was made solely by me. Also, if you're curious as to how an Iceberg chart works, check out the other 2 Iceberg videos on my channel. This is the Complete Mascot Horror Iceberg Explained, Part 1. Really quick before I start this Iceberg, I want to give 3 rules for the kinds of games I'm going to be covering today. Rule number 1 is no fan games. Sorry if you were hoping to see them here, but this Iceberg is only going to be covering official stuff. Rule number 2 is no games that are made only for YouTube videos. There's been a massive influx of Mascot horror games being made by amateur developers for content, and while it is cool to watch, I'm not covering them here since they're not real Mascot horror games. Rule number 3 is that if there are multiple games or chapters of a franchise, I'm going to be covering them all in one entry, as I think it's pretty unnecessary to cover games like Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 and Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 separately. The only exception to this will be if I think that the 2 are different enough to warrant individual entries. Layer 1. Layer 1 of this iceberg covers only the most popular of the most popular Mascot horror games. These are games that all Mascot horror fans, and even non-Mascot horror fans, are at least somewhat familiar with. Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's is honestly its own cultural phenomenon at this point. What started out as just a few indie games created by the legendary Scott Cawthon quickly turned into books, toys, a movie, and so much more. FNaF has completely transcended being a simple Mascot horror game at this point, and its influence keeps growing more and more as time goes on. The series recently turned 10 years old in August, and had an absolute fantastic week to celebrate. There are also multiple new games, books, and a second movie on the way next year. FNaF is easily by far the most well-known Mascot horror game, and it'll probably stay like that for a while. Bendy and the Ink Machine. Bendy and the Ink Machine is a game created by the Meatly and Mike Mood that has basically laid the foundation for the modern Mascot horror game. Chases, gameplay gimmicks, returning to an abandoned establishment, it all started with this game. The original starred Henry, an ex-employee of Joey Drew Studios, an extremely popular animation company. After 5 chapters of inky adventures, the game ends on the twist that the entire thing was just a cycle taking place within the studio's ink machine as torture, which by the way has to be one of my favorite video game endings. We then got Boris and the Dark Survival, which we don't talk about, before finally getting Bendy and the Dark Revival years after the original game, and it was completely worth it. Currently the series has multiple new games and a movie on the way, but not much is known about any of them. Poppy Playtime. Poppy Playtime is an extremely popular Mascot horror game, where you star as an ex-employee of the Playtime Co. toy factory, who returns to the establishment 10 years after an incident that killed every single employee and customer besides yourself because you weren't there. With the help of your grab pack, you face off monster versions of the company's toys, solve puzzles, and discover secrets about the factory. The game currently has 3 available chapters, with Chapter 4 releasing in just a month as I write this. While the first 2 chapters were criticized for a lack of horror, Chapter 3 is often regarded as one of the best Mascot horror games ever made, and was my personal game of the year for 2024. Wait, what do you mean you can tell I didn't play many games that year? Jokes aside, Poppy Playtime is one of my favorites in the Mascot horror sphere, and I am very excited for future chapters. Hello Neighbor. Hello Neighbor is another pretty popular Mascot horror game made by Dynamic Pixels, and stars a young adult character who breaks into his mysterious neighbor's house after some suspicious activity being reported. The original game received multiple alpha versions that gradually gave a better look at the final game. However, when the final game did release, It was met with immense negative reception for being much worse than the alpha versions, and having borderline indecipherable lore that felt like it was more interested in capturing MatPat's attention than telling a good story. There was also a sequel released, which I'm told was better than the first, but still not a great game. In fact, both games were so bad that most Hello Neighbor fan games just try to make the original better, some of which are really good by the way. There was also a TV show of all things released, and the fact that the games are as bad as they are really makes me mad, honestly, as I think this game is conceptually amazing and full of potential. But I guess they did something right to be this popular. Garten of Ban Ban. Garten of Ban Ban is quite possibly the most infamous mascot horror game ever made. Between its monotonous gameplay, directionless story, and very apparent lack of horror, the franchise is basically just seen as a joke compared to a lot of mascot horror, for good reason. The game is developed by the Euphoric brothers, whose reputation has completely 180'd from babies who can't take criticism to respectable people. The series itself has also seen a more positive turnaround, with many people saying that the most recent 7th game is actually quite decent rather than complete trash. Unless the games see a massive increase in quality, this will probably be the only time I cover Garten of Ban Ban on this channel, so get used to it. Baldi's Basics. Baldi's Basics is a very strange entry on this list, as it originally started as a simple game jam game that was a parody of games like Sonic Schoolhouse, with the twist being that it's actually a horror game disguised as an educational game. Although, in my opinion, this game works way better as an ironic parody rather than a horror experience. The game was never meant to be any sort of big mascot horror game, yet it completely blew up after being released. The game consists of collecting note boos, which is actually how it's spelled in game, while avoiding Baldi and a variety of enemies, although only Baldi can end your run. The game received both a remaster and plus version, as well as a sequel of sorts in the form of Baldi's Camping Field Trip. I was a bit hesitant to put this game at layer 1, given its massive dip in popularity over the last few years, but it was so popular and iconic when it was around that it only seemed fair. Layer 2. Layer 2 of this iceberg covers games that, while still being very popular, aren't the absolute titans of the mascot horror genre. Indigo Park. Indigo Park is a game centered around exploring an abandoned amusement park with the help of the park's handy AI assistant, Rambly the Raccoon. As I make this video, the game currently only has one chapter. However, Chapter 2 has been in development for a few months now. The game is being developed by Unique Geese and his team, with Unique Geese being someone whose biggest claim to fame prior to Indigo Park was remaking Garten of Ban Ban Chapter 1 in a week with no experience. The game was met with mostly positive reception on release, however it was also criticized for having lackluster gameplay and using a pretty standard formula for its structure. I personally think it's a fine game, but I do hope that Chapter 2 focuses on better and more innovative gameplay and direction. Choo Choo Charles. Choo Choo Charles is honestly a pretty underrated game, where you use a train to navigate an island that's been occupied by a different spider train named Charles. Oh yeah, this Eugene guy is also here, for a little bit at least. The game released in December of 2022, and was met with fairly positive reception. However, it was also criticized for a lack of polish. There doesn't seem to be any plans for a sequel, as the game's developer, 2-Star Games, is currently developing a multiplayer game called Cuff Bust, which you should definitely wishlist on Steam, by the way, it looks pretty good. Finding Frankie. Finding Frankie by Super Lou Games is a game that made some massive innovations in the gameplay of mascot horror, as the game is a combination of a parkour challenge as well as a horror experience. This game was massively hyped up before release, however it was also said to have missed potential and an unclear story. I never made a video on the game when it came out, but I honestly wish I did because of how much I enjoyed the game despite its flaws. Project Playtime. I was initially debating whether or not to just cover this in the Poppy Playtime section, but I do think this game is different enough to warrant its own section. I already explained Project Playtime in a past video, but to sum it up, it's a 5v1 multiplayer horror game where the survivors solve puzzles to build a toy, while the monster hunts down and kills players. While Project Playtime was initially super popular, it quickly stopped gaining players after its abysmal Season 3 launch that completely changed the game, which is such a shame as those first 2 seasons gave me so many good memories. Rainbow Friends. Rainbow Friends is a pretty unique entry on this iceberg, as it's one of the only games on here to be made in Roblox, which has greatly helped its popularity. The game itself is nothing too special, with both chapters featuring fetch quest gameplay and extremely lazy character designs, but those aspects plus the game being free to play on Roblox has made it a massive hit on YouTube, with the creators even scoring a Fat Mojo contract. Currently, the developers are in a legal battle with a small YouTuber, so there hasn't been a Rainbow Friends Chapter 3 yet, despite Chapter 2 releasing in the back of summer of 2023. Amanda the Adventurer. Amanda the Adventurer is somehow the first Mascot horror game to truly embrace the analog horror aesthetic, despite franchises like FNaF having a long history of fan-made VHS tapes. Anyways, this game, created by Mangled Mod Games, revolves around solving puzzles in a creepy attic while watching tapes of an old show called Amanda the Adventurer. This game, as well as its demo from 2022, were met with praise for their unique gameplay and captivating story, which is impressive for a game that started out as a Game Jam entry. The game's sequel came out a few months later in 2024, and while not as good as the original in my opinion, it's still a solid game and a good sequel. Layer 3. Layer 3 of this iceberg covers games that are decently well known, but might have slipped through the cracks of the general Mascot horror fans a little bit. Don't Fret. Don't Fret is a Mascot horror game that is also themed around music, taking place in a music school and having you literally play as a guitar. The game is being developed by Rocket Music, who are famous for their various nerdcore songs about Mascot horror games. The game currently only has a demo, but the full game is expected sometime in 2025. My Friendly Neighborhood. My Friendly Neighborhood is pretty much the only game on this iceberg that is both a survival and Mascot horror game, which is already an amazing idea. The game centers around an old Sesame Street-like TV show, starring these puppets who are now alive for some reason. This is honestly barely a Mascot horror game, as so much of it feels like an actual survival horror game that I honestly really like. Unfortunately, this game kind of slipped under the radar of Mascot horror fans, but I would highly recommend playing it for yourself. Muzy. This is by far one of the stupidest games I'm covering today. Muzy is a game made by a teenager, I think, and stars a detective who breaks into a play place or something. While the game's demo was criticized for using AI-generated art and heavily derivative character design, the full game was criticized for being unbelievably generic. Pretty much nothing about this game stands out among a lot of other Mascot horror games, with chase scenes, gimmicks that make no sense, and cryptic lore, ooh. Well, at least it has this glorious jump scare. Currently, a remake of Muzy Chapter 1 is being developed called Muzy Dark Toyland, however, I really doubt it'll change much. Joyville. Joyville is an extremely nothing game created by Could Play Games. The game stars some dude going to a magical family fun area with spooky monsters who look like this. Yeah, that's this game's whole design quirk. The main character, Wooly Bully, you cannot make this up, has eyes inside of his mouth. Does this literally make any logical sense? Yeah, obviously. This game also has a teddy bear of all things as its gameplay gimmick, despite it literally just being a keycard. The game also got a Chapter 2 featuring Lumina, as its main antagonist. I've heard that Chapter 2 was apparently way better than the first, but I honestly don't care. The only thing that really sticks out about this game is the fact that its production value and graphics are pretty good for how generic it is, but besides that, this is no different from Muzy or Ban Ban, or a lot of other games on this iceberg. Kinito Pet. Kinito Pet is a very interesting game about one of those browser buddies things from the early 2000s. You know those little dudes that showed up on your computer to help sort files and whatnot? Well, now you have Kinito Pet, your very own browser buddy. The twist of this game is that rather than being a piece of spyware like some actual browser buddies, Kinito Pet wants to spend an eternity with you in a world that he designs for you at the end of the game. Oh yeah, and he doxes your location. It's honestly a shame that this game is at Layer 3, as it's super good and I highly recommend playing it for yourself. Dandy's World. Dandy's World is another Roblox game on this iceberg that was developed by Quelver. There was another developer of this game at one point, but we don't talk about him. Anyways, the game has you and your fellow toons solving puzzles and avoiding enemies in this weird fantasy world. The game has a decent following on YouTube, however, just like Rainbow Friends, the game has gotten a huge amount of engagement on Roblox due to its young audience. Thank you guys so much for watching part 1 of this Iceberg. I was originally going to make this into one long video, however, since I'm covering a total of 35 different games, I thought it made sense to split it up into 2 parts like my last Iceberg. Unfortunately, part 2 will probably have to wait a bit, as I'm currently working on 2 other videos I want to get out before working on that. Still though, I hope you enjoyed and are excited for part 2. But anyways, that's all from me. I'm Supersonic, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.